We have with us this afternoon Marty Abbott, founding partner of AKF Consulting. Marty, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Marty, what are the characteristics of a great leader?
I'm going to tell you something you may not want to hear. I don't think there are great leaders. I think there are people who, in some circumstances, some contexts, ultimately accomplish great results, and the attributes that they have aren't necessarily transferable to other contexts or great results. And I think we actually do ourselves a disservice by putting these people on a pedestal and saying these are the 3 or 5 or 6 characteristics you need to have to be successful. In reducing the leadership equation to something that simple, we'll get young leaders going out and trying to do things that they're just not qualified to do, or they don't have the attributes to do. I think leadership is a multivariate equation, and none of us understand all the components of it. Some people are very successful in making and keeping aggressive commitments at the cost of all else. Others who have higher emotional quotients aren't as successful in doing that, but are successful in building people up to accomplish missions. So I just don't, I've studied it my entire life, and I don't think there's one right answer. I do think in general the best leaders are rather dynamic. So rather than saying here are the 3 to 4 or 5 things that you should be doing, they understand that they need to adapt to the circumstances and adapt to the individuals. In other words, the team you have today may not be the same as the team that you have tomorrow, and you need to be able to understand how they will work best with you.
Great.
Probably a little more complex than you were hoping for.
Not at all. Great answer. What are the greatest challenges you have faced as a leader?
Well, I think, oftentimes the greatest challenges are ethical ones, and we're not always successful unless we surround ourselves with people who are willing to speak truth to power. We're not always successful in identifying when we're in those circumstances. So we might do the same thing day after day after day, but the context around us changes, and as a result of it, potentially you would be doing the same thing that was right yesterday, but ethically incorrect today. Without people surrounding yourself with people who can say, hey, by the way, there might be an ethical concern here, you could, unwittingly or unknowingly create an ethical, or cause an ethical violation, or commit an ethical violation. And as a result, I think, when you develop teams, it's important to think about ensuring that you have people working with you who are willing to tell you those things, because that's kind of scary, right? Speaking truth to power can be concerning for some people. They might think that they're going to lose their job. Creating an environment where people know that they can always question the ethical consequences of some action and bringing it to your attention is very important.
How did your engineering education prepare you for leadership?
I think that, at its heart, engineering curriculums help people break down complex problems and solve them to create unique solutions. So, and leadership's not that much different than a math problem. I described it earlier as a multivariate equation. Being able to critically analyze what's going to make you successful in an environment is incredibly important to achieving success. And I think that's something that most engineering curriculums are good at doing, helping people identify a very complex problem, simplifying it, and identifying the appropriate solutions for it.
Great. What other methods of leadership development were important in your growth as a leader?
I think personally, and I don't have a whole lot of data to support this, but I think the only leadership development that's beneficial or has a high correlation with success are laboratory environments where you immerse people in specific situations, force them to practice doing different things, identifying what works for them and what doesn't. Talking about it in a classroom simply doesn't have that effect. You can be successful, I think, in identifying what doesn't work for most people. We're not as successful in most situations with identifying what does work. In other words, if we see somebody who's successful and we identify 2 or 3 things that we think might have caused that success, there's no way of knowing for sure that that's right. We're much more successful when we identify why something didn't work for somebody and then keeping that in the back of our minds and learning by or through the failures of others and ourselves.
What advice would you give to students who want to become great leaders?
Practice. Put yourself in difficult situations. Focus not on how to be successful or great, but rather how, trying to accomplish great things. And in so doing, you'll ultimately be seen as being successful and great.
What can universities do to support leadership development?
Well, they can do a heck of a lot more than they do today. I think there are 3 great but imperfect examples of young leadership labs. All 3 of those, I think, are run by the U.S. government, specifically the military academies. They immerse, and they've gotten better over time. They immerse the students in leadership positions early, put them in difficult situations, allow them to learn through trial and error, attempt to support that through some level of academic learning over the course of 4 years. We really need to strive to do that more in other universities. Leadership, I said before, there's no great, I don't believe there are any great leaders, but I see leadership as being a journey rather than a destination. It's something you need to learn through the course of your life, and you should always be studying and assume that you can always get better.
How has globalization impacted leadership?
Wow. The context within which we lead is very important. And culture is an incredibly important part of that context. What will make a person successful with a U.S. engineering team isn't necessarily the same thing that will make them successful in another culture, like with a German engineering team or with a Chinese engineering team. I've had the opportunity to lead engineering teams from, I think, 8 or 9 different countries now. And I often find that I initially fail in my first attempt because I try to apply techniques that have worked for me in the past. Successful, or people who meet with the greatest success, I think, identify that their approach is failing early and attempt to modify it. Once again, it's a dynamic context. It's a complex system. You can't simply say the same thing that worked yesterday is going to work tomorrow. And that's especially true across cultures.
What key events or people were instrumental in putting you on the path to leadership?
Hundreds. Everyone I've ever run across. I think I can learn something from everyone. Not necessarily always, how to be better at something, but oftentimes what not to do. Certainly the United States Military Academy was important to my development, and my years in the Army, one big leadership lab. Then leaving the Army, trying to figure out how to take the lessons I had learned through the course of 9 years at that point and apply them in the civilian world. Again, I didn't meet with success all the time. The approaches weren't always right for a civilian environment. So people like John Ruddy, who was my first boss at Motorola, helped me make that transition. But I think every boss I've ever had, every peer I've ever had, every employee I've ever had, I've learned something from.
Thank you very much, Marty.
Oh, thank you.